April 19th. The morning to my great joy, about 9 o'clock, the surface of the moon being frightfully near, and my apprehensions excited to the utmost. The pump of my condenser at length gave evident tokens of an alteration in the atmosphere. By 10, I had reason to believe its density considerably increased. By 11, very little labor was necessary at the apparatus, and at 12 o'clock, with some hesitation, I ventured to unscrew the tourniquet. When finding no inconvenience from having done so, I finally threw open the gum elastic chamber and unrigged it from around the car. As might have been expected, spasms and violent headache were the immediate consequences of an experiment so precipitate and full of danger. But these and other difficulties attending respiration, as they were, by no means so great as to put me in peril of my life. I determined to endure as I best could in consideration of my leaving them behind me momentarily in my approach to the denser strata near the moon. This approach, however, was still impetuous in the extreme, and it soon became alarmingly certain that although I had probably not been deceived in the expectation of an atmosphere dense in proportion to the mass of the satellite, still I had been wrong in supposing this density, even at the surface, at all adequate to the support of the great weight contained in the car of my balloon. Yet this should have been the case, and in an equal degree as at the surface of the earth, the actual gravity of bodies at either planet, supposed in the ratio of the atmosphere condensation, that it was not the case. However, my precipitous downfall gave testimony enough. Why it was not so can only be explained by a reference to those possible geological disturbances to which I have formerly alluded. At all events, I was now up close upon the planet and coming down with the most terrible impetuosity. I lost not a moment, accordingly, in throwing overboard first my ballast, then my water kegs, then my condensing apparatus and gum elastic chamber, and finally every article within the car. But it was all to no purpose. I still fell with horrible rapidity, and was now not more than half a mile from the surface. As a last resource, before having got rid of my coat, hat, and boots, I cut loose from the balloon the car itself, which was of no inconsiderable weight, and thus clinging with both hands to the network, I had barely time to observe that the whole country, as far as the eye could reach, was thickly interspersed with diminutive habitations. Ere I tumbled headlong into the very heart of a fantastical-looking city and into the middle of a vast crowd of ugly little people, who none of them uttered a single syllable or gave themselves the least trouble to render me assistance, but stood like a parcel of idiots, grinning in a ludicrous manner, and eyeing me and my balloon askant with their arms set akimbo. I turned from them in contempt, and gazing upward at the earth so lately left, and left perhaps forever, beheld it like a huge dull copper shield, about 2 degrees in diameter, fixed immovably in the heavens overhead, and tipped on one of its edges with a crescent border of the most brilliant gold. No traces of land or water could be discovered, and the whole was clouded with variable spots and belted with tropical and equatorial zones. Thus, may it please your excellencies, after a series of great anxieties, unheard of dangers, and unparalleled escapes, I had at length, on the 19th day of my departure from Rotterdam, arrived in safety at the conclusion of a voyage undoubtedly the most extraordinary and the most momentous ever accomplished, undertaken or conceived by any denizen of earth. But my adventures yet remain to be related, and indeed, your excellencies may well imagine that after a residence of 5 years upon a planet not only deeply interesting in its own peculiar character, but rendered doubly so by its intimate connection and capacity of satellite, and the world inhabited by man, I may have intelligence for the private ear of the State's College of Astronomers of far more importance than the details, however wonderful, of the mere voyage which so happily concluded. This is, in fact, the case. I have much, very much, which it would give me the greatest pleasure to communicate. I have much to say of the climate of the planet, of its wonderful alternations, of heat and cold, of unmitigated and burning sunshine for one fortnight, and more than polar frigidity for the next. of a constant transfer of moisture by distillation like that in vacuo, from the point beneath the sun to the point the farthest from it, of a variable zone of running water, of the people themselves, of their manners, customs, and political institutions, of their peculiar physical construction, of their ugliness, of their want of ears, those useless appendages in an atmosphere so peculiarly modified, of their consequent ignorance of the use and properties of speech, of their substitute for speech in a singular method of intercommunication, of the incomprehensible connection between each particular individual in the moon with some particular individual on the earth, a connection analogous with and depending upon that of the orbs of the planet and the satellites, and by means of which the lives and destinies of the inhabitants of the one are interwoven with the lives and destinies of the inhabitants of the other. And above all, if it so please your excellencies, above all, of those dark and hideous mysteries which lie in the outer regions of the moon, regions which, owing to the almost miraculous accordance of the satellite's rotation on its own axis and its sidereal revolution about the earth, have never yet been turned, and by God's mercy never shall be turned to the scrutiny of the telescopes of man. All this and more, much more, would I most willingly detail, but to be brief, I must have my reward. I am pining for a return to my family and to my home, and as the price of any farther communication on my part in consideration of the light which I have it in my power to throw upon many very important branches of physical and metaphysical science, I must solicit, through the influence of your honorable body, a pardon for the crime of which I have been guilty in the death of the creditors upon my departure from Rotterdam. This, then, is the object of the present paper. Its bearer, an inhabitant of the moon, whom I have prevailed upon and properly instructed to be my messengers to the earth, will await your excellency's pleasure and return to me with the pardon in question, if it can in any manner be obtained. I have the honor to be, etc., your excellency's very humble servant, Hans Phall. Upon finishing the perusal of this very extraordinary document, Professor Rub-a-Dub, it is said, dropped his pipe upon the ground in the extremity of his surprise, and Minor Superbus von Underduck, having taken off his spectacles, wiped them and deposited them in his pocket. So far forgot both himself and his dignity, as to turn round 3 times upon his heel in the quintessence of astonishment and admiration. There was no doubt about the matter. The pardon should be obtained. So at least swore with a round oath Professor Rub-a-Dub, and so finally thought the illustrious von Underduck, as he took the arm of his brother in science, and without saying a word, began to make the best of his way home to deliberate upon the measures to be adopted. Having reached the door, however, of the burgomaster's dwelling, the professor ventured to suggest that as the messenger had thought proper to disappear, no doubt frightened to death by the savage appearance of the burghers of Rotterdam, the pardon would be of little use, as no one but a man of the moon would undertake a voyage to so vast a distance. To the truth of this observation, the burgomaster assented, and the matter was therefore at an end. Not so, however, rumors and speculations. The letter, having been published, gave rise to a variety of gossip and opinion. Some of the otherwise even made themselves ridiculous by decrying the whole business as nothing better than a hoax. But a hoax with these sort of people is, I believe, a general term for all matters above their comprehension. For my part, I cannot conceive upon what data they have founded such an accusation. Let us see what they say. Imprimis, that certain wags in Rotterdam have certain especial antipathies to certain burgomasters and astronomers. Don't understand at all. Secondly, that an odd little dwarf and bottle conjurer, both of whose ears for some misdemeanor have been cut off close to his head, has been missing for several days from the neighboring city of Bruges. Well, what of that? Thirdly, that the newspaper which struck all over the little balloon were newspapers of Holland, and therefore could not have been made in the moon. They were dirty papers, and very dirty, and Gluck, the printer, would take his Bible oath to their having been printed in Rotterdam. He was mistaken, undoubtedly mistaken. Fourthly, that Hans Phall himself, the drunken villain, and the 3 very idle gentlemen styled his creditors, were all seen no longer than 2 or 3 days ago in a tippling house in the suburbs, having just returned with money in their pockets from a trip beyond the sea. Don't believe it, don't believe a word of it. Lastly, that it is an opinion very generally received, or which ought to be generally received, that the College of Astronomers in the city of Rotterdam, as well as all other colleges in all other parts of the world, not to mention colleges and astronomers in general, are to say the least of the matter, not a whit better, nor greater, nor wiser than they ought to be.